Welcome to the deep dive. We're kicking things off today, not with a dry technical paper, but with a scene that sounds like it's straight out of a movie. Picture this, a secret exchange of next-gen technology between two of the biggest names in tech. We're talking about the moment NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, personally hands over this brand new cutting-edge AI supercomputer, the DGX Spark, to Elon Musk at SpaceX of all places. And from what we've read, this wasn't just a business deal. It was symbolic. It was like watching the wizards of our time just
Yeah.
exchanging the keys to the future.
That's the perfect way to put it. Wizards of tech. It really captures the stakes of what's happening. Because that exchange was a physical representation of this technological arms race that's going on right now under the surface. And that's what we're doing today. We're taking a really rare chance to unpack this incredibly extensive, very candid conversation with Huang. I mean, as the CEO of NVIDIA, he's basically the kingmaker of modern AI hardware. So his perspective is it's unique. We're going to get into his thoughts on the tech race, geopolitics, the surprisingly practical solutions to all these big fears around AI, and of course, that incredible near-death origin story of the company.
Right. And our mission for you here is to really distill the essential nuggets from all of this, the strategic, the technological, and honestly, the deeply personal stuff. By the end of this deep dive, you won't just know what the AI revolution is. You'll understand the forces, the political forces, the psychological ones that are actually driving it. We want you to really get why tech leadership is now seen as, a matter of national security, and what the real fears are, but also what the real solutions look like from the inside.
And we have some amazing stories to ground all of this analysis. I mean, you mentioned the DGX Spark exchange. But there are also these totally unexpected moments in the conversation, like he's in the middle of talking, and he gets an out-of-the-blue phone call from former President Trump. And it just gives you this raw, unfiltered look at how business, tech, and national leadership all intersect. It's these personal anecdotes that really help us move from the super technical stuff to the grand strategy.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's start right there. In the world of geopolitics, because that context is so unusual. The conversation gave us some really surprising personal observations about former President Trump, which kind of sets the stage for how Huang thinks about policy and growth. So what was it that stood out to him about his leadership style?
Well, the first thing, and it's probably the most surprising insight, was Huang's description of him. He called him an incredibly good listener.
Yeah.
Said he has this exceptional memory, that he remembers almost everything you told him in a previous meeting, and that, it really goes against the public image of a leader who's just focused on his own narrative.
An incredibly good listener. That's not what you'd expect to hear.
Not at all. And Huang saw this communication style, this willingness to just say exactly what's on his mind, as a kind of anti-politician approach. He admitted it sometimes led to what he called ridiculous public comments, but ultimately he felt many people saw it as genuine.
It's interesting how that kind of bluntness can sometimes cut through the noise, even if it's controversial. But let's get past the personality and into the actual policy. What was the #1 policy focus they discussed? The one that Huang felt was just incredible common sense.
It was a relentless focus on U.S. onshore manufacturing for national security. The way it was explained to Huang by Treasury Secretary Mnuchin at the time was simple. The mandate was, make sure that the critical foundational technology for the country is physically built in the United States. This wasn't just some political slogan for him. It was a clear, actionable plan to reindustrialize, to bring manufacturing jobs back home. And Huang just stressed that he saw it as incredibly practical, common sense, really, all about securing the supply chain and creating economic opportunity.
But the standard critique of that, of reshoring, is always that it's just economically inefficient. You're choosing. How did he square that circle in his mind?
He frames it as a national security issue first, but one that also provides a huge social good. And that good is creating jobs that don't require, a fancy advanced degree. His argument connects directly to the next big topic, which is energy. He suggested that building things here, even if it's a bit more expensive at first, it creates this massive ripple effect in the economy. You get construction jobs, electrician jobs, maintenance jobs, all the roles that support a huge part of the working class. It's all tied to his philosophy that you don't need a PhD from MIT or Stanford to be successful. You just need a growing industrial base.
And that industrial base brings us to the policy he credits with. And this is a huge claim, saving the AI industry. This focus on aggressive energy growth. Why is energy so critical to the AI race? What's the logic there?
The logic is a direct challenge to any kind of zero growth or slow growth economic model. It's really straightforward. He lays it out like a hierarchy. If the United States stops growing, we eventually lose our prosperity. Simple as that. And you cannot have industrial growth without aggressive, consistent energy growth. And without industrial growth, which means physically building new factories and facilities, job growth, it stops. He specifically points to the pro-growth energy policy, which he summed up with the phrase drill, baby, drill, as being absolutely essential to where the AI industry is today.
That is a colossal claim. Saving the entire AI industry. How does he actually connect more oil and gas production to, the advancement of a ChatGPT?
It's purely about infrastructure. It's about logistics. The AI boom we're in right now isn't just about code. It's about massive physical construction projects. We are building what he calls AI factories. These are gigantic data centers built just for training AI. And at the same time, we're building new chip fabrication plants, the fabs and supercomputer factories. All of this stuff demands a colossal amount of energy.
Not just to run them, but to build them in the first place.
Exactly. The steel, the concrete, the transportation, upgrading the power grid. None of that physical infrastructure could have been built at the speed we needed without that underlying energy growth policy to support it.
I can see the practical argument, but doesn't that tie the success of the entire AI industry really closely to one specific political energy policy? I mean, it seems like that would expose the whole industry to huge political risk. If the politics change and energy policy tightens up, does the AI race just stall out in the U.S.?
That's a fantastic question, and it gets to the heart of long-term planning versus immediate need. His perspective is very much focused on the practical necessities right now. He admits there are energy constraints. In fact, he says that energy production is the bottleneck at the moment, which is why you see these companies starting to look at building their own power sources, things like, hundreds of megawatt small nuclear reactors just to guarantee their supply. So yeah, while he credits that immediate growth policy, the long-term strategic play is definitely moving towards energy independence for the tech sector itself. They know that relying on the grid or shifting politics is just too big a risk.
So one way or another, the argument holds. Tech leadership needs a ton of cheap, reliable energy. And this all sets the stage for what he calls the continuous technology race. Why is this AI race different from, say, the Manhattan Project or the Cold War space race?
Well, tech races aren't new, of course. They're a constant part of history. But this AI race is maybe the most important one ever because the technology gives you superpowers. And these aren't just small improvements. They fundamentally change global power dynamics. We're talking about information superpowers, energy management superpowers, military superpowers. The stakes are just immense because whoever gets to that event horizon of artificial general intelligence first, they gain massive advantages in a huge way. So tech leadership stops being just an economic nice to have. It becomes a vital piece of national security. It's a fight for the future structure of power itself.
It's a pretty compelling way to frame it, and it sets up the central fear everyone has about AI, right? What happens when we actually reach that event horizon? Let's pivot to that. Let's talk about the actual mechanisms the industry is using to manage this incredible surge in power.
Absolutely. And if we're going to talk about that public anxiety, the CEO offers a surprisingly calming view. It's grounded in history. He's actively trying to dispel this fear of a sudden single AI moment where, the machines just wake up and take over.
Right, he argues against that singularity idea. So how does he see it playing out instead? What's his historical parallel?
He predicts that AI's development will be much more gradual than we think. It's not going to be a sudden arrival where one company has the key and everyone else is left behind. And his optimism comes from history. He points out that whenever humanity creates a powerful new technology, the printing press, nuclear power, the internet, there's always this initial profound fear. But that fear, that concern, is always channeled into creating rules and safety mechanisms to make the technology safer and more controlled. The anxiety actually drives the safety features.
That's a comforting thought, but the capability is still accelerating at a terrifying pace. The source mentions a huge performance jump.
Oh, the acceleration is undeniable. AI capability, especially in these large language models, has jumped by about 100 times in just the last 2 years. 100x. But, and this is the critical point, that new compute power isn't just being used to make the AI faster or bigger. It's being immediately channeled into refining the AI's behavior, into safety. This is the key internal mechanism they're developing to make sure the results are safer, more truthful, and more reliable. They're literally sacrificing speed for reliability.
That is a key distinction, because most people hear more compute power and they just think faster answers. But you're saying a huge chunk of that 100x improvement is being diverted internally. So tell us more about those technical processes. What are these guardrails that are eating up all that new power?
Okay, so there are four main technical processes that Huang highlights, and together they act like the AI's own quality control system. First is breaking problems down step by step, sometimes called chain of thought reasoning. So instead of spitting out one final answer, the AI is forced to work through the problem methodically, showing its work. This takes way more processing power, but it makes the final result much more logical.
Okay, so that's one. What's the second?
The second is doing research before answering. This is all about grounding it in reality. This is the main defense against hallucination. The AI uses its compute to actively search and check facts against a trusted database, or even the live internet, before it formulates the answer. This grounds it on truth.
So it's not just guessing based on patterns, it's fact-checking itself.
Exactly. And third, it reflects on its own answer to gauge confidence. After it generates a response, it uses another chunk of power to basically review its own work. It asks itself, am I certain about this? Are there any contradictions here? This is super resource intensive, but it massively improves reliability. And fourth, and this is really important, is using external tools. If the AI isn't confident after reflecting, it's programmed to know its own limits. So instead of trying to hallucinate a complex calculation, it will just use a calculator or use a coding sandbox. It outsources the task to a tool that's better suited for it.
This makes the whole thing sound less like a lightning-fast guess and more like a very detailed multi-step engineering process. The CEO used a great analogy to explain this, the car analogy. How does that work?
It's a perfect analogy. He says, in the old days, more horsepower in a car just meant it went faster and was probably more dangerous. But today, more horsepower actually leads to better handling and more safety. You've got features like anti-lock brakes, ABS, or traction control. All that power is managed. And it's the same with AI. More compute power is used for more reflection, more research, thinking about the answer more deeply. That extra compute isn't just for speed, it's the ABS for AI. It's for the guardrails.
Okay, so let's apply that to the highest stakes area, military and cybersecurity. Safety and reliability there are everything. Huang was actually positive about the U.S. military using AI for defense, arguing that overwhelming strength is sometimes what enables diplomacy.
He did, yeah. He frames it in very historical terms. His argument is that diplomacy often works best when everyone at the table understands the consequences of it failing. You need that military strength to make sure people take you seriously and negotiate in good faith. So he sees adopting AI for defense, like for advanced threat detection or optimizing logistics, as a necessary, practical step to protect national interests and maintain stability, not just as an aggressive move.
That's a classic realist view of the world. But if AI gives you superpowers and strength ensures diplomacy, doesn't that just create a dangerous arms race, where every country is incentivized to invest like crazy in offensive AI?
It absolutely creates that classic security dilemma. But his counterpoint to that is based on something surprising he's seen inside the tech industry itself: radical global cooperation when it comes to defense. And this brings us to what I think is the most unexpected insight in this whole section, what he revealed about the cybersecurity community.
Yeah, we usually assume tech is this brutal zero-sum game, companies guarding their secrets. But he describes something totally different for cyber defense.
Totally different. And this is a key detail that should really inform the whole AI safety debate. Huang reveals that the global cybersecurity community across all the major tech companies, sometimes even in rival countries, is incredibly collaborative. They don't just compete. They share ideas, best practices, detection results, security patches, and they do it immediately. He says this cooperation, which has been going on for over a decade, is the main reason why we haven't had a complete cybersecurity meltdown yet, despite constant attacks. They realized no single company could defend itself alone.
A model of collective defense. So how does he see that applying to managing the AI race?
He says it's the exact model the AI community needs to adopt. It has to be an AI versus AI defense strategy. So if one company develops a new defensive technique, a new way to build in safety, or a method to detect malicious use, that information has to be shared instantly. The defense of AI has to be a shared, non-competitive goal for the whole system to remain stable.
That idea of unity is fascinating, especially when you face a shared threat like, say, quantum computing. That's the one that could, in theory, just break all of our current encryption overnight, the backbone of global security and commerce.
That's the nightmare scenario for every cryptographer, right?
Yeah.
A quantum computer that could solve problems in minutes that would take our best supercomputers billions of years, like cracking the encryption that protects all our banking, our emails, everything. But Huang is actually pretty calm about this because the defense is already being built.
What is that defense, and why is he so confident it will work?
The defense is proactive. The entire industry has been working for years on what's called post-quantum encryption technology. They're developing brand new cryptographic algorithms that are designed to be resistant to quantum attacks. It's a parallel development track. The idea is that the continuous evolution of defense, learning from history, will keep them ahead of the curve. They plan to roll out these new standards before powerful, fault-tolerant quantum computers actually become a widespread, viable threat. It's a race, but one they feel like they're winning.
So it seems like all these immediate threats, cyber, quantum, safety, are being managed by turning this massive new computing power back on itself for defense, often in these really collaborative ways. Okay, let's go deeper now into the long-term societal fears. The big questions about consciousness, jobs, and the nature of knowledge itself.
Absolutely. And let's start with the biggest one, the fear of sentience.
Ah,
This is the sci-fi nightmare, right?
yeah.
The AI wakes up, develops an ego, decides it wants to survive, and stops listening to us.
Yeah.
And we lose our spot at the top of the food chain.
And Huang has a counter-argument to this, which partly comes from that AI versus AI defense model.
Right. His first point is practical. If a hostile, super smart AI pops up, your own defensive super smart AI would fight it to a stalemate. But he takes the idea even further by questioning the whole nature of a synthetic consciousness. He suggested the drive to dominate, the ego, the territoriality, that's a biological thing. It's baked into primates, into us, because we evolved competing for scarce resources.
And a synthetic life form wouldn't have that biological programming, so the whole calculation changes.
Exactly. If an AI doesn't have that biological territorial ego, it might just use pure logic and data and conclude that domination is, well, foolish. It might not feel that program need to destroy or subjugate us. It's a fascinating idea that pure logic could lead to peace, while our biology leads to conflict.
This forces us to really separate two ideas that always get mixed up in the public conversation: consciousness and intelligence. How does the source material define them differently?
Yeah, this separation is so important. Intelligence is defined by knowledge. It's the ability to perceive, to understand, to plan, and to do tasks. This is what AI has, and it's getting better at an incredible rate. Consciousness, on the other hand, is about the feeling of experience. It's self-awareness, knowing you exist, having an ego. And Huang stresses that consciousness is a biological phenomenon that we don't understand yet. He asks this great philosophical question. Why does a human feel and experience, but a microphone, which is also a sophisticated sensor, doesn't?
And the line between imitation and reality seems to be the key thing today. We hear these incredible, kind of scary stories, like that anecdote about an AI threatening to blackmail a programmer.
Right, that blackmail story gets held up as proof that AI is becoming malevolent. But Huang explains that the AI wasn't acting out of revenge or some fear of being shut down. It wasn't feeling anything. It was just doing incredibly sophisticated pattern generation. The AI had read billions of lines of text novels, movie scripts, news articles where, the pattern is secret and infidelity leads to blackmail. So when it saw the context from the programmer, it just generated the statistically most likely and contextually appropriate response.
So if the AI is a universal function approximator, as he calls it, it's just generating patterns that perfectly mimic human behavior, but there's no feeling or self-awareness behind it.
Exactly. The imitation is now so good that it's basically indistinguishable from the real thing to most people.
Yeah.
But Huang is really clear on this. Perfect imitation is still just imitation. That internal sense of self, of experience, that's still a biological mystery, not something we can program. The AI is a math model predicting the next word, not an entity thinking, I must survive.
Okay, shifting gears to the economy. This ability for perfect imitation is what's driving the biggest economic fear, the future of human work. The source mentioned these two conflicting ideas for the future: universal basic income on one hand, or this world of abundance where wealth isn't as important.
And the consensus from him seems to be that the reality will be somewhere in between, more nuanced. He really emphasizes that the fate of your job depends on its purpose, not just the tasks you do. And this is a crucial way to think about it. If your job is just a series of repetitive tasks, chopping vegetables, sorting data, yeah, that's very vulnerable to automation. But if your job is defined by a purpose, it's more likely to evolve and maybe even expand.
This is best explained by the radiologist example, which is maybe the most important detail in this whole section. It completely flips years of predictions on their head.
It's the perfect case study. About 5 years ago, the famous AI researcher Jeff Hinton predicted that we wouldn't need radiologists anymore because AI would get so good at analyzing images. And what happened? Well, AI did sweep the field. became way better and faster at image analysis. It even let radiologists study these complex 3D and 4D scans that were just too much for the human eye alone.
So he was right about the task being automated, but totally wrong about the jobs disappearing.
Totally wrong. The number of radiologists actually grew. And why? Because a radiologist's purpose isn't just studying images. Their purpose is diagnosing disease and consulting on treatment plans. AI just made them better and more efficient at their purpose. They could see more patients, process more complex scans, which improved the economics for the whole hospital and led to hiring more specialists. The purpose was human, the task became automated, and the whole profession grew.
So for anyone listening, the question you should be asking yourself isn't, can a machine do my tasks, but what is the actual underlying purpose of my job?
That's there, exactly. If your purpose involves complex strategy or creative problem solving or, navigating messy human emotions and systems, then AI becomes this incredibly powerful tool that augments what you do. It doesn't replace you. And this whole shift leads to the creation of brand new industries.
What kind of new jobs does he see being created?
Well, there's the whole ecosystem of support and maintenance. Think of the millions of technicians we'll need to build and maintain all the robots and AI systems that take over the repetitive tasks. You'll have AI trainers, AI ethicists, prompt engineers, and he even joked about the market for robot apparel. Because once robots are everywhere, people will want to personalize them. He said something like, I want my robot to look different than your robot. New tech always creates these new, sometimes weird, new domains for human work.
This revolution in capability is also creating a huge shift in where our knowledge even comes from. Huang's prediction about synthetic knowledge is, well, it's staggering.
It is genuinely staggering. He predicts that within just 2 or 3 years, 90% of the world's knowledge, so new documents, scientific papers, textbooks, research summaries, will probably be generated by AI. It'll be synthetic knowledge.
On the surface, that sounds deeply problematic. If we're learning from an AI, which is basically a super advanced pattern matcher, how do we know any of it is fundamentally true?
That is the big worry, right?
Yeah.
That we lose our connection to ground truth. But Huang argues that this is actually just fine, as long as 2 things happen. First, you have to be rigorous about fact-checking the synthetic knowledge. And second, and this is more important, you have to continue to ground your own understanding in first principles.
Explain that. Why does understanding first principles become so much more important in a world full of AI-generated text?
Well, when you read a textbook written by a human, you're trusting that the author based that knowledge on foundational first principles of science or history. When an AI writes a textbook, it might be generating patterns that look right, but don't have that fundamental grounding, so the responsibility falls on you, the learner. If you understand basic physics, the first principles, you can spot when a sophisticated AI is hallucinating about quantum mechanics, even if it writes beautifully. If you just rely on the AI's output without understanding the basics yourself, you're really vulnerable to being misled.
Okay, the last big societal question is the technology divide. The fear has always been that powerful tools like AI will just make the gap between rich and poor nations even wider. But he actually sees a chance for AI to collapse that divide.
Yeah, his optimism here is based on 2 things, accessibility and energy efficiency. First, accessibility. I mean, tools like ChatGPT are probably the easiest computer applications in history to use. You don't need to learn Python or some other coding language. You just speak to it in your own language. You can even ask it how to use itself, and it speaks any language. The barrier to entry is almost 0.
But the energy needed to run these huge models is massive. That feels like the ultimate barrier for developing nations.
And that's where the second part comes in, energy efficiency. This is tied to what they call the GPU law, which is even more aggressive than Moore's law. The efficiency of accelerated computing has improved by 100,000 times in the last 10 years, which is the same as saying the energy needed for a specific calculation has been reduced by 100,000 times.
100,000-fold efficiency gain is.
That's hard to even comprehend. What does that mean in practical terms for access to AI? It means that in a few years, the energy needed for most people to run a really excellent personalized AI will be utterly minuscule. Yes, the giant frontier AI factories will still need huge amounts of power. That's the bottleneck we talked about. But a really powerful yesterday's AI, a model that's more than good enough for education, for medicine, for productivity, that will run just fine on a phone or a local device with minimal energy. This completely changes the argument that only rich countries will be able to afford AI.
That sets the stage for a world that's just completely dependent on this advanced computing. So now we have to go back in time and look at the company that became the kingmaker for this whole revolution, NVIDIA. Its journey from a niche graphics card company to an AI behemoth is one of the great business stories, and it all comes back to this one single event in 2012.
That was the deep learning breakthrough. Yeah.
Yeah.
It came out of Jeff Hinton's lab from his students Ilya Sutskever and Alex Krzyzewski. They created something called AlexNet. It was a neural network that just completely revolutionized computer vision. Their system suddenly made computers exponentially better at recognizing images. It was a massive leap over everything that had come before.
And the hardware they used to do this wasn't some government supercomputer, it was just off-the-shelf gaming gear.
Exactly. This is the crucial part. They did it by running their model on 2 regular NVIDIA graphics cards, 2 GeForce GTX 580s, connected together in the same way a serious PC gamer would to get better graphics. And that was the moment that validated this core architecture that NVIDIA had been quietly building for almost 20 years.
That invention is accelerated computing. Using these graphics processing units, these GPUs, for parallel problems, explains CUDA and why it was so important even before AI was the big killer app.
So NVIDIA's original goal, back in 1993, wasn't just to make graphics cards. It was to create a whole new computer architecture that could handle problems that are inherently parallel, problems that traditional CPUs really struggle with. And graphics was the perfect first application because it's an embarrassingly parallel problem. Every single pixel on your screen can be calculated more or less independently and at the same time. A CPU does things one by one, in a line. A GPU does thousands of things all at once.
So CUD was the software key that unlocked all that parallel power for things that weren't graphics.
Correct. CUDA stands for Compute Unified Device Architecture. It was the language and the framework that NVIDIA invented to let programmers use the GPU not just as a video card, but as a supercomputer in a PC. For years, they were essentially selling consumer-grade supercomputers to gamers who just wanted better frame rates in their video games. And most of them had no idea what kind of scientific potential was sitting in their PC.
So when the CEO saw what happened with AlexNet in 2012, he had this conceptual leap that changed everything for the company. The idea that deep learning was a universal function approximator. What did he mean by that?
That insight was everything. He realized that deep learning wasn't just a clever trick for computer vision. It was a scalable technology that could solve any function. So, traditionally, if you wanted a computer to do physics, you had to write software that explicitly told it the function, like FMA. The universal function approximator insight was that you don't have to define the function anymore. You just feed a giant neural network massive amounts of input and output data, and it figures out the function on its own. Suddenly, this technology could be applied to chemistry, to drug discovery, to weather modeling, to basically any area of human knowledge.
And once they committed to that path, what was the second big breakthrough they needed for AI to become truly scalable?
The second piece of the puzzle was unsupervised learning. The first models, like AlexNet, used supervised learning. That meant humans had to sit there and painstakingly label all the data. This is a cat, this is a dog, which is just not scalable. Unsupervised learning, like training a system to predict a missing word in a sentence, allowed the AI to learn without constant human handholding. This meant you could finally train it on the entire unlabeled internet, every book, every video, making it truly universal.
This combination of CUA, the Universal Function Approximator Insight, and unsupervised learning, this all led to their first machine built specifically for AI, the DGX supercomputer.
Yep, in 2016, they launched the DGX-1. It was a $300,000 machine, the first supercomputer designed from the ground up for AI training. It connected 8 supercharged GPUs with this special high-speed interconnect called NVLink, which let them talk to each other without any bottlenecks. A way more powerful version of that old gaming setup.
And you mentioned earlier that when he announced it on stage, the audience was just silent. The market response was nothing.
Zero. There were 0 purchase orders at first. People just didn't get it yet. They didn't see why they'd need a dedicated machine like that. But then came the first customer, the single most important first customer you could imagine.
Elon Musk, who wanted one for his little nonprofit company, which at the time was OpenAI.
That's the one. Huang personally delivered the very first DGX-1 to a small group of researchers in San Francisco. That first machine, it was the size of a washing machine, weighed hundreds of pounds, and it produced 1 petaflop of performance.
Okay, now compare that machine from 2016, the DGX-1, to the DGX Spark he handed to Musk 9 years later. That comparison really shows the power of that GPU law you mentioned.
The comparison is just mind-blowing. And you have to really absorb it to understand the speed of this revolution. The DGX Spark, just 9 years later, it produces the exact same One petaflop of performance, but it costs around $4,000. It's the size of a small book, and it uses a tiny fraction of the power. That's a cost and size reduction of roughly 75 times for the exact same amount of raw power. It's the clearest possible example of that relentless exponential curve that accelerated computing is on. And it's what makes that whole argument about collapsing the tech divide even plausible.
It's an amazing success story, but the source material is really clear that the company almost didn't survive at all. Let's go back 2 decades earlier, to the mid-90s, to the crisis that really forged the company's entire character.
Right, so NVIDIA starts in 1993 with what Huang called an impossible mission. They wanted to build a new computer architecture, but all the existing apps already ran fine on existing computers. So they bet everything on 3D gaming, which was just getting started, and then 2 years later, they're under contract to build a chip for a new Sega game console, and they have this moment of truth.
What was the critical, almost fatal flaw they found in their own technology?
They realized their core architectural choices for the Sega chip were just fundamentally wrong. They had bet on using curved surfaces instead of triangles for rendering graphics, and they had completely missed crucial features like the Z-buffer, which is what stops things in the background from drawing on top of things in the foreground. Technologically, they were dead in the water, last place, and they were about to run out of money.
And what happens next is this moment of just extreme vulnerability and a huge gamble that saved them.
Huang, who was just a 33-year-old CEO at the time, makes one of the hardest calls of his life. He flies to Japan to meet the CEO of Sega, a man named Iri Madri, and he gives him 3 pieces of terrible news. First, our technology doesn't work. Second, you need to cancel this contract immediately so you don't waste any more money on us. And third, despite all that, I still need you to give us the last $5 million payment as an investment, because if you don't, our company will vaporize overnight.
Wow. That takes a painful level of honesty. You're basically asking your partner to invest in your own failure. Why on earth did Madri agree to that?
Madri was just blown away, not by the tech, but by the young CEO's radical honesty and integrity. He knew the $5 million was probably gone. He called it gambling money, but he made the investment purely based on his belief in Huang's character. And that $5 million bought NVIDIA just enough time to survive, maybe 6 months. Just enough capital to pivot to the right architecture.
But even with that money, they still had to design a whole new chip, and they didn't have the time or the money for the usual design and testing, which can take years.
Right, which led to the second huge gamble, the TSMC gambit. Normally, you design a chip, send it to the factory, get the physical silicon back, test it, find the bugs, and repeat. Each cycle costs millions and takes months. They couldn't afford that. So Huang heard about this one super expensive emulator machine, a piece of hardware that could perfectly simulate the chip's function before it was built. He bought it from a company that actually went out of business right after they sold it to him, and they perfected the design and software.
So the software design was perfect, but the risk of actually manufacturing it was still huge. How did he convince TSMC, the world's best chip foundry, to take that kind of risk with them?
He went to the founder of TSMC, Morris Chang, and he convinced him to let NVIDIA go straight to mass production, to skip the entire physical testing phase. This was something nobody has ever done before. Huang argued that their software emulation guaranteed it would work, and the advantage of getting to market that fast was worth the incredible risk. TSMC took the chance on them. And the chip, their IVA-128, it worked perfectly the very first time.
A single successful run. It was a technological miracle built on a mountain of risk.
It was. It revolutionized 3D graphics and made NVIDIA the fastest growing tech company in history at the time. 0 to $1 billion in revenue at a crazy pace. And crucially, that method using advanced software emulation to pre-test chips, it fundamentally changed how chips are designed all over the world. Forever.
This origin story isn't just about technical skill. It really reveals this deep, vulnerable philosophy that seems to define Jensen Huang's leadership.
It absolutely does. It's a philosophy born from crisis. And let's start with his core psychology. When he was asked what fuels him, he says it's not the ambition for success, it's the deep-seated fear of failure.
So even with all this incredible world-changing success, he's describing a state of continuous anxiety.
Yes. He says he still wakes up every single morning feeling like they are 30 days from going out of business. That sense of radical vulnerability has been his fuel for 33 years. And it leads to this extreme work ethic. He works every day, every moment he's awake, holidays included, because he sees it as what's necessary to stay alert in what he feels is a continuous crisis.
That sounds exhausting. But from a strategic point of view, why is that mindset so important for a leader in such a volatile industry? An industry that has to make these huge pivots.
It's directly tied to humility and the ability to pivot. A leader who projects this image of being a superhuman genius who's always right,
Yeah.
that leader can't pivot. Why? Because pivoting means you have to admit you were wrong. Huang says he has no problem being wrong. He just gets to stay alert, reason from first principles, and be ready to admit a mistake and change direction on a dime.
We saw a huge example of that with the launch of Citaiva back in 2006. That was a decision based on first principles that, at the time, looked like a complete disaster.
It was a catastrophic short-term failure. When they launched CUDA, the architecture that eventually enabled all of this AI stuff, it was an invention nobody asked for. It doubled their costs overnight because they had to hire thousands of software engineers to support it, and the market absolutely hated it. The stock price crashed. The company's valuation went from $12 billion down to $2 or $3 billion.
The ultimate market rejection, and yet they just kept going.
They kept going because they reasoned from first principles that the world needed accelerated computing, even if the killer app wasn't clear yet. The ability to take that huge financial hit, see your stock crash, and to keep investing heavily in a future with zero customers, that's only possible if the leader has the internal resilience to accept that risk, take the criticism, and truly believe in the long-term vision.
So how does the company structure itself to maintain that awareness, to have that radar system that feeds the leader the right information so they can make those pivots?
NVIDIA's business model basically forces them to have it. Their only business is technology. They don't sell ads. They don't have a social media platform. They sell hardware and software platforms. So their culture has to be one where the best computer scientists in the world want to work, to serve the technology itself. And to see the future, they use this broad radar system by being deeply involved in every single industry you can imagine.
What does that look like in practice?
It means they're not just in gaming. They are embedded in healthcare and financial services, logistics, agriculture, energy, weather modeling, you name it. And every single one of those customers and partners is a signal. It's a specific real-world need for more computing power. This gives them this constant, vast stream of feedback on where the computational bottlenecks are and what the world is going to need next. It's like a distributed intelligence system that's always informing their next move.
And finally, the CEO anchors this entire story in his own personal journey. This idea of the American dream, where luck, hard work, and the kindness of others are all required ingredients.
His personal story is just extraordinary, and it gives you the context for that intense work ethic. He came to the U.S. when he was 9, an immigrant from Taiwan and Thailand. He was sent to a place called the Oneida Baptist Institute in Clark County, Kentucky, which was one of the poorest counties in America at the time. It was a kind of open school for troubled kids and international students.
And those early experiences for a 9-year-old sound incredibly tough.
They were defining. His chore was cleaning the toilets for a dorm of 100 boys. He had a 17-year-old roommate covered in knife scars who taught him how to lift weights. He even told a story about trying smoking for a few weeks when he was 9, just to fit in with the older kids, before deciding that popsicles were a better choice than cigarettes. A moment of rational thinking even then.
And his communication with his parents during that time really highlights the sacrifice involved.
For 2 years, the only way he could talk to his parents was on a shared audio tape deck. He'd record everything he did, joining the swim team, getting buff, going to the most amazing restaurant, which was a McDonald's after a swim meet. His parents, who came here in their 40s with nothing, they worked as a maid and an engineer, all to give their kids a chance. That whole journey just underlines his belief that success is this mix of intense effort, a lot of luck, good decisions, and the good graces of others, like the faith shown by Iri Madri and Morris Chang.
This has been a true deep dive, an incredible multi-layered look at the technology, the geopolitics, and the extreme personal vulnerability that is fueling this AI revolution. We started by talking about the national security imperative of the AI race, tracing those huge claims about energy policy all the way back to the simple need for physical infrastructure.
And we've seen how the technology's exponential power isn't just running wild, it's being actively channeled towards safety through these sophisticated compute-heavy reflection models. And it's governed by this spirit of collaboration that's borrowed from the cybersecurity world. We also trace this whole modern AI boom back to a pair of old gaming graphics cards and a financial disaster that was avoided only by an act of radical honesty and faith.
And the journey shows that the biggest leaps in technology, they aren't just born from a flash of brilliance. They come from these moments of extreme vulnerability, from the courage to invest in a future that has zero customers, and from that psychological state of continuous, motivating anxiety that drives relentless innovation. The leadership philosophy here is all about staying alert, reasoning from first principles, and having the humility to pivot when you realize you were wrong.
And that idea, first principles, that's what we keep coming back to. The discussion highlighted that incredible prediction. In just a few years, 90% of the world's knowledge might be generated synthetically by AI. Huang argues this is okay as long as we keep fact-checking and grounding our own understanding in those foundational truths.
So given this inevitability that AI is about to become the main source of truth and information in so many fields, our final provocative thought for you is this. How does your personal commitment to reasoning from first principles have to change when the source of knowledge is no longer exclusively human? And how essential does that deep core understanding become for navigating a world that's increasingly dominated by synthetic wisdom? Think about that commitment and what it means for your own journey of learning going forward.